6 men went up into the snow on the high pass the night the throat came down, and 6 men came back out of it alive, lifted free one at a time by the bare hands of a woman that Pack had cast out years before and called a bringer of death. She dug them out of the killing dark with a lantern and a spade and 10 cold fingers, one, and then another, dragging each broken cold weight down the ridge to her fire, while the storm tried to take them all. And the 6th, the last, the one buried deepest and nearest gone, when she breathed the warmth back into him through the worst hour before dawn, and his eyes finally opened, he did not thank her, not yet. He stood up in her one-room hut at the edge of the world, swaying, frost in his hair, and he was the Alpha King of those lands, and his wolf had known her hands a full hour before the man knew her name. This is the story of that night, and of the 4 days after it, when the woman who saved a king's life was very nearly put to death for it. Stay close by the fire a while. The storm in this one is long. You are going to watch a wolf recognize its mate while the man it belonged to was too frozen to speak, and you are going to watch a whole pack be made to see at last that the hands they had called death-bringing were the only living thing for a mountain in any direction. The wolf knew first. It always does. The slow part, the part that costs, is the pack. It began the way her exile had begun, with the pack deciding what she was and never once asking her. They called her Ida the Cold-Handed, up in the Stagmere lands, and they did not mean it kindly. She had been the pack's healer once, the best in 3 territories, trained by her grandmother and her grandmother's grandmother in the old cold craft, the drawing of fever, the setting of bone, the long, patient art of pulling a body back from the edge it wanted to go over. For years her hands had been the most welcome thing in any sick room in Stagmere. And then a black fever came one winter, the kind that comes maybe twice in a healer's life, and it went through the pack like fire through dry heather. And Ida worked 9 days without sleep, and saved more than anyone living could have saved. And still it took 11 of them before it burned out. And one of the 11 was the old Alpha's own mate, his Luna of 30 winters, and a pack drowning in grief, and an Alpha drowning worst of all, needs a shape to put the grief on. And the shape it chose was the woman who had been holding the dying when they died. Her hands were on him at the end, they said. Cold hands. Death came in under cold hands. It was not true. Her hands had been the only thing fighting the death. But grief does not want what is true. It wants what it can blame. And within a season, the whispers had hardened into a verdict, and the verdict cast her out. Not killed. The pack was not cruel that way, or told itself it was not. Just driven from. Sent up the eastern ridge to the old shepherd's hut above the tree line, beyond the boundary stones, to live alone where her bad luck could not drift back down on the rest of them. The healer whose hands bring death. She had been 26. She was past 30 now, and she had lived 4 winters alone on the ridge, and the pack had never once sent to tell her she was forgiven, because in their hearts they had not forgiven her, because grief that old does not so much heal as harden into the shape it cooled in. And yet, on the dark nights, the desperate still came. That was the thing Ada would have told you about her pack, if you had climbed the ridge to ask her, which no one ever did. They had cast her out for bringing death, and then they crept up to her door in the worst hours to be saved from it. A father with a child blue and choking, a young wolf with a wound gone bad and green, a woman 3 days in a labor that would not finish. They came up the ridge by night when no one would see them go, and they knocked low on her door, and Ada got up, every time, and lit her lantern, and let them in, and put her cold craft hands on the people of the pack that had thrown her away, and pulled them back from the edge, and asked nothing, and watched them slip away again before dawn, so that no one would know they had, and asked nothing, and watched them slip away again before dawn, so that no one would know they had come. She had saved more Stagmere lives from the ridge in 4 years of exile than most healers save in a lifetime in honor. None of them thanked her by daylight. None of them met her eye at the boundary stones. And Ada had stopped expecting it, the way you stop expecting a season that does not come. And she kept her lantern trimmed and her hands ready, because the work was the work, and she had decided long ago that she would rather be a death-bringer who saved them than a welcome woman who let them die. That was Ida. The pack thought her bitter and strange and unlucky, a cold woman alone on a cold ridge. They were wrong about the cold, the way grieving people are always wrong about the one they have decided to blame. The night the throat came down, she was awake. She was nearly always awake in the deep of a storm. A healer sleeps light, and a storm is when the ridge needs her. And she was sitting by her banked fire with her grandmother's lamp at her elbow when she felt the mountain move. You feel it before you hear it. An avalanche. The floor of the world shifts a half-inch under you, and your body knows before your mind does. Then came the sound, a long, low, grinding roar off the high pass to the north. The throat, the narrow neck of trail that climbed from the Stagmere Valley over the shoulder of the mountain, the only winter road from the Eastern Territories. And Ada was on her feet before the roar had finished, because she knew that sound, and she knew what was under the high pass at that hour, and the knowing turned her cold all the way down. There were travelers on the throat. She had seen them go up at dusk. 6 riders, cloaked plain, pushing to cross the pass before the storm closed it. A fool's errand and a brave one. The kind of men who cross a winter pass at night are always either desperate or important, and usually both. She had watched them from her door, 6 dark shapes against the failing light, and thought, they will not make the crest before it breaks. And she had been right. And now the throat had come down on top of them. And there was not a wolf in the Stagmere Valley below who would hear it through the storm, and not one who would climb up into a live avalanche slope in the black of a blizzard, even if they had. There was only Ida on the ridge, already pulling on her boots. You should understand what she was choosing. There in the dark, with the storm screaming. She was past 30 and alone, and the slope was still moving, and the cold that night was the kind that kills a healthy wolf in an open hour, let alone a woman with no wolf at all in her to warm her. No one would have blamed her for barring the door. No one would even have known. The men on the pass were nothing to her. Strangers, off-comers, probably from the very kind of haul that had cast her out. And she owed the world above the boundary stones precisely nothing. She took her lantern and her spade and a coil of rope and 3 of her grandmother's wool blankets, and she went out into the storm anyway, because she was a healer, and a healer does not get to choose which dying are worth the climb. I am going to tell you about the digging, because the digging is the heart of this, and because it is the part the pack would later try hardest to turn into a crime. She found them by the lantern and by the old woodcraft her grandmother had drilled into her. Read the slope, girl. The snow tells you where it put things. The way the avalanche debris piled and fanned. The dark scatter of a dropped saddlebag. The place where the snow lay wrong over something it did not want to be lying over. She found the first man by his hand. It was sticking up out of the white, gone gray, not moving, and Ada dropped to her knees and dug with the spade, and then with her bare 10 fingers, fast, flinging the snow, and she got his head clear and his chest clear, and put her ear to him, and found, under the cold, the smallest stubborn thump of a heart not yet ready to quit. And she hauled him out by the arms, a big, slack, wolf-heavy weight, and she got him onto a blanket and dragged him sledding down the ridge to her hut, and rolled him in by the fire and went back out for the next one. That was one. The second was 10 feet from the first, buried deeper, and she nearly missed him. It was the lantern catching the brass of a cloak pin that saved him. She dug him out the same way, fingers raw now, and dragged him down. That was 2. The third and the fourth were close together, half sheltered by a boulder that had split the slide. Luckier, nearer the surface, one of them even half conscious and able to push feebly at the snow as she cleared it. Which was a mercy, because by then her hands had stopped being hands and become 2 clumsy, aching clubs at the ends of her arms. She got them both down. That was 3 and 4. Her hut was filling with frozen men. Her fire was roaring now. She had built it high before she ever went out, knowing she would need it, and the 4 of them lay around it like cordwood, while she rubbed and chafed and forced warm water between blue lips, and cursed and prayed in her grandmother's old words, and went back out. Because 4 riders she had counted at dusk was wrong. She had counted 6. The 5th took her an hour. He was deep and far, flung wide by the slide, and the storm had filled in every sign, and Ada quartered that killing slope in the black, with her lantern guttering, and her own body beginning the long argument with the cold. And she found him at last only because she stopped, and stilled, and listened. Not with her ears, the storm took her ears, but the way her grandmother had taught her, with the whole skin of her, for the wrongness in a field of snow. There. A hollow where there should be none. She dug down 4 feet and found him curled at the bottom, and he was very nearly gone, and she breathed into his mouth and pounded his chest, and would not let him be gone, and dragged him up and down the ridge with the last real strength in her arms. That was 5. And then there was the 6th. She almost did not look for the 6th. 5 men were more than any one woman could save in a night, and she had saved them. Her hut was a tangle of half-frozen bodies and steam and firelight. Her own hands had begun to go the dangerous numb that comes before the killing numb, and the sensible thing, the thing no one could have faulted, was to bar the door and keep the 5 she had and save herself. She stood in her own doorway with the storm at her back and the fire at her front, and she thought about the 6th rider, the one she had not yet found, somewhere up there under the throat in the dark, and she thought, no one would ever know. No one would ever know there had been 6. She knew. She went back out for the 6th. He was the deepest of all of them, and the farthest, flung to the very edge of the debris where the slope dropped away to the ravine. And if he had gone a body's length farther, he would have gone over and been lost till spring. She found him past the worst hour of the night, when the storm had blown itself ragged and a hard, clear, killing cold had come down behind it, and the stars had come out hard as chips of ice. She found him because her lantern, lifted, caught one thing in all that white, the curve of a hand, open, palm up, as though even unconscious and 4 feet under, he had been reaching for the surface. She dug to that hand first. It was a big hand, scarred across the back, a fighting man's hand or a working one, and when she closed her own ruined fingers around it to find the life in the wrist, something happened that had never happened to Ida in a lifetime of pulling the dying back from the cold. The hand closed on hers, not a living grip. The man was far past gripping. He was gray and still, and his heart, when she found it, was a slow, failing flutter, a candle in a draught. It was something under the man that closed on her. She would puzzle at it for days after and never quite find the words. But I will give them to you, because you have been around this fire before and you know what was happening. It was his wolf. The great animal under the king's frozen flesh sunk almost as deep as the man, down where the cold had not yet reached the last ember of it. His wolf caught the scent of the hand digging him out of his grave, an ordinary woman's scent. Cold craft herbs and wood smoke and snow, and the wolf came up out of the dark of its dying and put everything it had left into one thing, into closing that hand around hers, because it had been waiting its whole long life to find that scent, and it had found it at the bottom of a grave, and it was not going to let go. Ada did not understand it, but she felt it, felt the wrongness of a dying hand holding on, felt the way her own cold skin seemed to wake where his closed over it. And being a healer and not a fool, she did not waste the night on wondering. She dug him out. She got his frozen weight up out of the snow and onto the last blanket and down the long ridge to her fire. And he was the worst of the 6 by far, the nearest gone. And she spent what was left of that night fighting for him the way she had not fought for a life in years. She stripped the frozen wet from him and wrapped him in dry wool and laid him as near the fire as she dared. She heated stones and packed them at his core. She breathed for him when his own breath faltered, mouth to cold mouth, and pounded the slow heart when it tried to stop, and chafed the great scarred hands between her own, and poured warmth into him out of her own failing body for hour upon hour, talking to him low in her grandmother's old words the whole time, the way you talk a frightened animal in off a ledge. Stay now, stay. You've come too far down to go over now. I've got you. I have got you. Stay. And all through it the strangest thing. Whenever the man sank, whenever the heart stuttered toward stopping, it was as though some deeper part of him reached for her hands and steadied at her touch, came back toward the warmth of her and not the cold, for her hands and steadied at her touch, came back toward the warmth of her and not the cold. Again, her hands and steadied at her touch, came back toward the warmth of her and not the cold, again and again, until the gray went slowly out of his face and a faint, true color came up under it, and his breath found its own rhythm at last and held. The other 5 she had saved by skill. This one she half thought she had saved by being wanted, by some part of him refusing, even unconscious, even dying, to let her go. She was too tired to make sense of it. The hard, clear cold outside softened toward gray. The longest dark of the storm wore itself out. And somewhere in the last hour before dawn, with the man's heartbeat finally steady under her hand, and 5 other saved men breathing rough and warm around the crowded fire, Ida, the cold-handed, who had not wept for her pack in 4 years of exile, put her face down against the scarred hand that would not release hers, and rested just for a moment, just to close her burning eyes. She woke because the hand let go of hers, and then it moved, lifted, and touched, very lightly, the side of her face. Ida lifted her head. The 6th traveler had opened his eyes. They were gray as the dawn coming up in the one window, and they were fixed on her with an expression she had no place to put. Not a stranger's confusion, not a rescued man's gratitude, but a kind of stunned recognition, as though he had been looking for her face for a very long time and could not believe it had finally been there at the end of the cold. He worked his cracked lips. No sound came. He tried again. "There you are," the Alpha King said, in a voice like gravel under ice. And then, because his wolf had run ahead of his mind, and his mind was only now staggering up to catch it, he frowned, faintly, at his own words, the way a man frowns at a thing he has said in a dream. For he did not yet know her name, or who she was, or where, and some older part of him had said, "There you are," as though it had every right. And then, because he was an Alpha King, and an Alpha King does not lie abed before a stranger, not even one who has just pulled him out of his grave, he gathered the wreck of his frozen body, and he set the great scarred hands flat against the floor of the hut, and against everything Ada knew about what a night like that does to a man, against every rule of her craft that said he should not have been able to so much as lift his head for a day. The last of the 6 travelers got his feet under him, and he stood. He stood up in the middle of her one-room hut at the edge of the world, swaying, a head taller than her, frost still melting in his dark hair, steadying himself with one hand on the rough wall, and the 5 other men, who had been waking around the fire, went still all at once and stared at him. And then, one after another, those 5 hard, travel-worn wolves got to their knees on Ida's earthen floor and bowed their heads to the man she had dug out last. "Your Majesty," croaked the oldest of them, a grizzled wolf with a huntsman's look, weeping openly. "Gods be thanked. We thought the mountain had taken you." Ida, on her knees by the fire with her ruined hands in her lap, looked at the swaying man she had breathed life into all night long, and understood several things at once. And the first of them was that the 6th traveler, the worst of them, the nearest gone, the one whose dying hand would not release hers, was the Alpha King of the Stagmere lands, the king of the pack that had cast her out. She had spent the night with her mouth against his to keep him breathing, and she had not known his face because she had been 26 and a daylight healer the last time she saw it across a crowded hall, and the boy who would be king had been a half-grown thing at the old Alpha's side, and the years and the exile and the frost had hidden the rest. "You're the king," she said. "I am Kade," he said, as though the name were an apology, his gray eyes never leaving her face. "Of Stagmere. And I think, forgive me, my mind is still under the snow somewhere. I think you are the only reason any of the 6 of us will see the sun come up. Whose hut is this? What is your name?" And Ida, who had learned long ago exactly what her name was worth to the people of Stagmere, looked the Alpha King in the eye and told him the truth, because she had never in her life had the luxury of telling them anything else. "My name is Ada," she said. "Your pack calls me the Cold-Handed. Your father cast me out of the valley 4 winters ago for bringing death into it." She held up her 2 raw, blistered, blood-cracked hands, the hands that had dug 6 men out of a grave that night. "These hands, the ones you've all been thanking. Stagmere decided a long time ago that they bring death." She lowered them. "I'd have come for you anyway. I want you to know that, Your Majesty, before the rest of it starts. And it will start the moment your valley learns whose ridge you woke on. I didn't climb up into that slope for a king. I didn't know there was a king in it. I climbed up because there were 6 men dying, and I was the only one awake to hear it. That's all I am. That's all I've ever been. Whatever they tell you I am after this, you were here, and you saw. And I want one person in that valley to have seen the truth of it with his own eyes for once." Kade the Alpha King stood swaying against the wall of her hut and looked at the exiled woman and her ruined hands, and something moved across his frost-burned face that she could not read. And before he could answer it, before any of them could, the dawn quiet broke. There were riders coming up the ridge, a great many of them, fast, the snow throwing up under their wolves. And at the head of them, on a black wolf the size of a yearling bull, came a broad, gold-bearded wolf lord in the colors of the king's own household guard, and the grizzled old huntsman by the fire breathed a name through his weeping that Ida did not yet know to fear. "Garrick," the old man said. "The war second. Thank the moon. He's come for us, lad. Hold on, Garrick's come." But Kade, the Alpha King, did not look thankful. Kade was staring out the window at the man riding up his ridge, and the frostburn had gone out of his face, and something colder than the night had come into it. Because a king's mind, even a king's mind, dragged up half-frozen from under an avalanche, holds on to certain things. And what Kade's mind was holding on to, suddenly and with terrible clarity, was the last thing he had heard before the world came down. Garrick's voice at his shoulder on the high pass, urging the night crossing. "Push for the crest, sire. The storm's near." And then Garrick's wolf falling back, dropping away to the rear of the party, in the last moment before the throat let go above them. "Ada," the king said, very low, very fast, not turning from the window. "Whatever happens in the next hour, say nothing about the slope. Say nothing about how it fell. Do you understand me? Trust me on this, and I will earn it after." There was no time for more. The door of the hut shook under a fist, and the war second's voice came through it, warm and huge and full of relief. And Ida heard underneath the warmth the thing the king had already heard, the thing that turns a rescue into a trap. "My king," Garrick boomed through the door. "Praise the moon. The trackers found your wolf sign on the ridge. We feared the worst. Open up, open up. And stand away from him, woman, whoever you are. Stand well away from the king." I want you to watch closely now, because this is the part of the night where everything Ida had done turned, in the space of an hour, from a miracle into a crime. And it turned not because anyone disproved a word of it, but because a man with a plan walked into a room and started naming things, and a frightened pack will always believe the loudest namer. Garrick filled the door of the hut when it opened, gold-bearded and grieving and magnificent, and his eyes went round the room. 6 survivors, the fire, the steam, the king on his feet. And Ada watched him do a small, fast sum behind his eyes that she did not understand until later, and watched the answer of it tighten his mouth for half a breath before the warmth came back down over his face like a dropped curtain. "The king is alive," the sum said. "The king is on his feet. The king is looking at me. This has all gone wrong." And a lesser schemer would have faltered there, but Garrick had not climbed to war second of the Stagmere lands by faltering, and he changed his whole plan between one breath and the next, right there in the doorway. And the new plan was beautiful, and it was this. If he could not have the king dead, he would have the king saved. Saved by was this. If he could not have the king dead, he would have the king saved. Saved by him, this. If he could not have the king dead, he would have the king saved. Saved by him, Garrick, the loyal war second, who rode through a blizzard to his sire's rescue, and the woman who had actually done the saving, the inconvenient witness who had pulled 6 men out of an avalanche that was never meant to leave survivors. She would become the thing the night had needed all along to make sense of itself. She would become the cause. "What is this place?" Garrick said, soft now, looking at Ida, at her hut, at the drying herbs hung from the rafters, at her cracked and bloody hands. His nose worked. "I know this scent. This is..." His face opened in a kind of horror that Ida had to admit, even hating him, was very well made. "Sire, do you know where you are? This is the Eastern Ridge. This is the cold-handed woman's hut, the Deathbringer. the one your father drove out." He turned to the kneeling huntsmen, raising his voice for them, for the riders crowding in behind, for everyone. Think how it happened. 6 of you cross a pass you've crossed 100 times. On a night she could watch you climb from her very door, and the mountain comes down on you in the one place it has not come down in living memory, and you wake in her hut, in her hands. The whole pack's bad luck made flesh, the living memory, and you wake in her hut, in her hands. The whole pack's bad luck made flesh, the woman memory, and you wake in her hut, in her hands. The whole pack's bad luck made flesh, the woman we cast out for exactly this, and you call it rescue. He shook his great head slowly. "Sire, I have heard of the old craft. Some of these ridge witches can read a slope like a book. Some of them, they say, can call one down." It was monstrous, and it was clever, and Ada felt it work. She felt it go round the crowded hut and out into the riders beyond, and she felt it catch, because it fit. That was the horror of it. It fit the shape the pack already carried in its grief-hardened heart. The cold-handed woman brings death. She always brought death. And here was death on a mountainside, and here were her hands all over the survivors of it. And a frightened, tired pack that has just nearly lost its king does not want the truth, which is complicated and accuses one of their own, when it can have the lie, which is simple and accuses the woman it already threw away. "That's not," the old huntsman began, struggling up. "My lord, she dug us out with her own hands. I felt her." "Of course she dug you out," Garrick said gently, sorrowfully. "She had to be found saving you, didn't she? A witch who lets 6 men die has nothing. A witch who pulls them from the snow has the whole pack in her debt, and a king asleep under her roof. He had an answer for everything. That is the mark of the thing, that it he an answer for everything. Seize her, gently. She's a woman, and she's clever, and the king is unwell and not to be troubled. We'll take them all down to the valley, sire and witch alike, and let the elders and the law sort the truth of it in the warm, not freezing on a ridge. Sire, you can barely stand. Let me carry the weight of this. Let me get you home." And he moved toward Kade with his arms out and his face full of love, the loyal second come to bear his stricken king home. And it was so good, it was so nearly perfect, that even Ada almost believed the love in it. And here is where she lost. I told you she would. I will not soften it. 2 of Garrick's riders took Ada by the arms, gently as ordered, but they took her, and she did not fight them, because a lifetime of being whatever the pack decided she was had taught her that fighting the grip only proves the grip right. The king tried to speak, to stop it, but Kade was a man pulled from his grave 6 hours before, and when he pushed off the wall to come to her, his half-frozen body betrayed him, and his knees went, and Garrick caught him with that perfect public tenderness. "Easy, sire, easy, you're not well. Lean on me," and used the catching to fold the king into the arms of 4 household guards who bore him, protesting weakly, out to a litter, away from her, surrounded, controlled, cared for. In the space of a few minutes, the war second had the king in from her, surrounded, controlled, cared for. In the space of a few minutes, the war second had the king in his, her, surrounded, controlled, cared for. In the space of a few minutes, the war second had the king in his keeping, and the witness in chains, and a story the pack wanted to believe. And Ada the cold-handed was carried down off her own ridge a prisoner, past the boundary stones she had not crossed in 4 years, back into the valley that had cast her out, to be tried, this time, not for bringing one death, but for nearly bringing 6, and for very nearly killing the king. She had saved every one of them, and it was going to be the death of her. They held the judgment in the pack hall of Stagmere 2 days later, when the king was judged well enough to attend. Though well enough was Garrick's judgment, and Garrick had kept Kade close and quiet, and surrounded those 2 days, fed by Garrick's own people, guarded by Garrick's own men, a king recovering from a near death under the devoted care of the very man who had arranged it. Ada they kept in a cold storeroom beneath the hall, and in 2 days not one soul of the pack she had bled herself dry, for came to speak a word in her defense, because she was the cold-handed, and the story was easy, and people are weak when the story is easy. The hall was full when they brought her up. The whole pack had come to see the Deathbringer answer for the worst thing she had ever supposedly done. The old Alpha was 4 years in the ground. It was Kade on the high seat now, pale and stone-faced and strange, with Garrick standing at his right shoulder, where a war second stands, one broad hand resting on the back of the king's chair, in a way that looked like loyalty and was, Ada now understood, a leash. Garrick laid it out for the hall, and he was very good. He did not rant. He grieved. He walked them through it the way he had in the hut, the witch on the ridge, the pass she could watch from her door, the avalanche in the one impossible place, the survivors waking in her hands. He called the huntsmen to speak, and they spoke honestly, that she had dug them out, and he turned even that to her account with a sorrowing word. Yes, yes, she was found saving you. A clever death wears the face of rescue. And then he played the card he had been saving, the one he thought would finish her. And it was the cruelest turn of all, because it took the one true and shining thing in the whole story and made it the proof of her guilt. There is a sickness on the king, Garrick told the hall gravely. You have all seen it these 2 days. He is not himself. He speaks of the woman, this woman, the cold-handed, when the fever is on him. He asks for her, a king of Stagmere, asking for a death witch by name. He shook his head, heavy with sorrow. I have heard the old people speak of what some of these witchcraft women can do to a man whose blood they have had under their hands all night. A binding, a glamour. She has put something on him. You can all see it. A king who should be calling for her banishment is calling for her company. What clearer proof could there be that her hands work an unnatural craft? She has not only tried to bury him under a mountain, she has witched him. And the only mercy left for our king is to put the woman who bound him beyond the boundary stones. The only mercy left for our king is to put the woman who bound him beyond the boundary stones forever. The only mercy left for our king is to put the woman who bound him beyond the boundary stones forever, this time for good. Driven from the territory under the old ban, and her hut burned behind her, and let him come back to himself once her hands are too far away to hold him. It was perfect. Ada, standing in the center of the hall with her cracked hands bound before her, felt the last door close, because it could not be answered. If she denied bewitching him, she was a witch lying. If the king defended her, and she could see him fighting too, see him straining against whatever Garrick's people had been dosing him with to keep him quiet, see the storm building behind his gray eyes, then his defense was the witchcraft itself, the bound man speaking for the woman who bound him. Garrick had built a wall with no door in it. Every true thing she could say had been turned into another brick. She was the cold-handed, and the pack wanted the story, and the story was about to drive her out of the world for good. And it was there, with no door left in the wall, and her ruined hands bound, and a whole pack's grief turned against her, that Ada the healer did the only thing she had ever been able to do in a place that wished her gone. The thing that was not a wolf's strength and not a glamour, and not luck. She paid attention, and she told them what the snow had told her. "You want to talk about the slope," Ida said. Her voice was not loud, but a healer learns to make a sick room go quiet, and the hall went quiet for it. "Good. Let us talk about the slope, War Second, because you have told these people I called it down with a craft, and I am a reader of slopes, and so I am going to tell you what I read on that one. And then any hunter in this hall who has ever cut a cornice loose to clear a trail can tell you whether I am lying." She lifted her bound hands, and she turned them so the hall could see the cracks and the blood and the blackened fingertips, and she used them to draw the thing in the air. An avalanche off the throat runs in a fan. It tears loose high and spreads low. The debris lies thrown wide, scattered, a hand of the mountain opening. I dug 6 men out of that snow, and I read every foot of it doing it, and that snow did not fall like a hand opening. It fell in a sheet, a clean cut from a single anchor point at the top of the cornice. The whole shelf let go at once, the way it goes when it is cut. When a body climbs above the trail in the dark, and works the anchor loose with intent, and drops the shelf on what is underneath it. She looked at the hunters in the hall, the working wolves, the ones who knew. "You know the difference. Every one of you who has ever cleared a winter trail knows the difference between a slope that falls and a slope that is dropped. I read a dropped slope, and 4 feet down, where I dug out your king, I found the king's own party scattered wide as the fan should scatter them. But I found one man's track that did not belong to the fan at all. A wolf's track, coming down off the high anchor after the slide, picking its careful way down through fresh debris that no one should have been alive in the middle of to be walking through, coming down from exactly the place a body would climb to cut the cornice." She let that sit. "I am a deathbringer, you have all decided. Fine. But I did not climb above the trail in the dark and cut the shelf loose on my own king's head. I was in my hut. I have no wolf to leave a track. The track I found was a wolf's." She turned slowly, and she looked at the great gold-bearded War Second standing at the king's shoulder. It was a big track, War Second, a yearling bull of a wolf. The kind a man rides up to a ridge at dawn, very fast, to be the first to reach the survivors of a thing he was certain would leave none. The hall did not roar. It did something worse for Garrick. It went still, and it began slowly to think. And a frightened pack that starts to think is the one thing a clever liar cannot answer, because every brick he laid was mortared with their fear. And thinking is what dries the mortar out. "She's grasping," Garrick said, but a thread had come into his warm voice that had not been there before. A track in fresh snow, 2 days melted, that no one can see now. She invents it because she's clever. I told you she was clever. Then let us speak of the thing no one can invent, Ida said. And now she turned to the king. She had not meant to. She had meant to keep to the slope, to the woodcraft, to the things a hall could be made to reason its way toward. But Garrick had built his whole wall on the king's bond to her, on the binding, on the unnatural craft of a woman whose hands a man could not stop reaching for. And Ada the healer knew something about wolves that the War Second, for all his cunning, had been too clever to remember, because it was not clever, it was only true. "You say I witched him," she said to the hall. "You say I put a glamour on your king with my hands in the night, that I bound him, that the proof I am unnatural is that a king calls for the cold-handed in his fever." She looked at Kade on his high seat, pale and straining, and watching her with those gray eyes. "Then ask yourselves one thing, you who have wolves in you and know what I am about to say in your own blood. Can a wolf be witched into a bond? She let the silence answer first. You know it can't. Every one of you knows it in your bones. A glamour can cloud a man's eyes. A craft can dull his pain or fog his thoughts. Yes, I have such crafts. I am a healer. I used them on him to keep his heart beating. But the bond, the mate bond, the thing a wolf knows and chooses past all the man's wanting, no craft in the world can make a wolf bond where it would not. The bond is the one thing in a wolf that cannot be tricked, cannot be bought, cannot be bound by any hand but the moon's own. You built your whole case on it, war second. You said, see how the king reaches for her, that is the witchcraft. But a king's wolf reaching for a woman is the one proof you cannot forge. Because a wolf does not bond to the hand that tried to kill it under a mountain. It bonds to the hand that dug it out. Her voice broke, finally, just at the end, and she let it, because it was true and the truth had earned the right to shake. His wolf reached for me at the bottom of that grave with the last strength it had. Before I knew his face, before I knew there was a king in the snow at all. You want to know why your king calls for the cold-handed in his fever? It is not because I bound him. It is because his wolf knew me before the man did, and a wolf does not unknow. And that was when Kade stood. He had been fighting Garrick's quiet leash for 2 days, fogged with whatever they had dosed him with, held down by his own slow healing body, and by the loving, devoted hands of the man who had buried him. But a wolf does not unknow, and Ada's voice had reached the place in him that Garrick's drafts could not, and the Alpha King of Stagmere came up off his high seat in front of his whole pack, and he put the gold-bearded war-second's hand off the back of his chair with one look, and the fog went out of his gray eyes, and what was left was very cold and very clear and entirely a king's. My wolf knew her in the snow, Kade said. His voice still scraped, but it carried to the rafters. She has the right of it, and I have been 2 days too poisoned and too proud and too well cared for. The word came down on Garrick like a blade. To say it. So hear me say it now, all of you, while my mind is my own. He came down from the high seat, one slow, deliberate step at a time, to stand by the bound woman in the center of his hall. I remember the pass. I have been trying to remember it for 2 days through the fog they kept me in, and it came back to me while she spoke. I remember Garrick at my shoulder in the dark, pressing the night crossing. Push for the crest, sire. The storm's near. I remember thinking it was reckless and trusting my war second past my own judgment, because that is what a king is taught. It was reckless and trusting my war second past my own judgment, because that is what a king is taught to. It was reckless and trusting my war second past my own judgment, because that is what a king is taught to do. And I remember the last thing before the world came down. He turned to Garrick, and the whole hall turned with him. I remember your wolf falling back, dropping to the rear, getting clear, a heartbeat before the throat let go above us. Silence. I have wondered for 2 days why my own second hung back on a narrowing trail in a storm. She read it in the snow with no wolf at all. I lived it. The slope was cut, and you cut it. And when I lived through the thing that was meant to bury me, you rode to my ridge to bury the truth instead. And you found a woman already there with 6 of us alive in her hands. And you tried to burn her for the rescue because you could not afford a single witness who had seen that the dead were supposed for the rescue, because you could not afford a single witness who had seen that the dead were supposed to the rescue, because you could not afford a single witness who had seen that the dead were supposed to stay dead. Garrick reached, at the last, for the only thing such men have left when the naming turns on them. He reached for the loud denial, the wounded loyalty. Sire, after everything, you would take a death witch's word over your own war seconds. But it was too late, because the hall was thinking now, and the hunters were murmuring about cut cornices and fallen-back wolves, and the old huntsman Ada had saved was on his feet shouting that he'd felt her dig him out with his own freezing body. And the thing Garrick had built had no door in its wall, true, but it turned out it had no roof either, and the truth came down through the top of it the way the throat had come down on the pass. They took him before he reached the door. Not gently. What was done with Garrick, the law did, and the law of Stagmere did not kill him, because for all its hardness it was not a killing law. He was stripped of his name and his rank and his place, every honor cut from him before the assembled pack, and he was driven from the territory under the old ban, beyond the boundary stones, out into the cold ridges with nothing and no pack and no welcome in any hall for the rest of his days, which for a wolf is a harder thing than the quick mercy he had tried to give his king. He went out the way he had tried to send Ida. The pack saw the justice in it. The pack, that day, was made to see a great many things. But the thing I want you to see, the thing this whole long night was built to bring you to, is what Kade did next, in front of them all, before he had so much as had her hands unbound. He knelt to her, the Alpha King of Stagmere, on his feet barely 2 days from his grave, went down on one knee in his own pack hall before the exiled woman they called the cold-handed, the death-bringer, the bad luck of the valley, and he took her bound and broken hands in his 2 scarred ones, the hands that had dug him out, the hands his whole pack had been taught to fear, and he turned them over, palm up, the way his own had been reaching up out of the snow when she found him, and he held them up so the hall could see what it had spent 4 years refusing to look at. These hands, the king said, pulled 6 men out of a grave one at a time in a killing storm when not one wolf in this valley below would climb the slope. These hands have crept down off that ridge in the dark for 4 winters to save the children and the wounded and the laboring women of the pack that cast their owner out. Yes, I have heard it now these 2 days. Half of you in this hall have been saved by the cold-handed and let her go back up the mountain unthanked before dawn, so your neighbors would not know you went. These hands held my heart, beating through the longest night of my life. He pressed his forehead to them, the king to the exile, and his voice came rough and low. My father drove a healer out on a pack's grief and a rumor, and called it justice. And I was a boy, and I let it stand. And these mountains are colder and called it justice. And I was a boy, and I let it stand. And these mountains are colder for her, called it justice. And I was a boy, and I let it stand. And these mountains are colder for it, and so am I. That ends today, and it does not end with a pardon, because a pardon is a king forgiving a wrong he should never have let happen. And I have no right to forgive what was done to her. Only she has that right. He lifted his head and looked at her, and the gray eyes that his wolf had opened first now belonged wholly to the man. Ida, the judgment that exiled you is reopened, and it is yours to answer, not mine. Name what was taken from you, and name what would make it right, and Stagmere will pay it to the last. Your place, your honor, the truth of the fever winter cried aloud in this hall, so every soul here knows your hands fought that death and never dealt it. And from this day, no healer of these lands is cast out on grief and rumor ever again. Let that law be cut in the boundary stone, that a pack does not throw away the hands that keep it alive because it needs something to blame. I owe you my life. My pack owes you 6. I cannot make the mountains warm enough to pay it. but I can put the asking in your hands, where it belongs, and kneel here until you tell me where to begin." Kade the Cold-Handed stood in the center of the hall that had cast her out, with the Alpha King of Stagmere kneeling over her unbound hands, and the whole pack watching her the way they had never once been willing to watch her. Seeing her, at last, all of them, the thing she had wanted for 4 years up on her cold ridge and had stopped letting herself want. And she found that the thing she most needed to say was not a price at all. "Stand up," she said quietly. "Your Majesty, stand up. I have spent a whole night and 4 years on my knees over the people of this valley, and I did not climb that slope to put a king on his." And when he rose, when the last of the 6 travelers she had dug out of the snow stood up once more, on his own feet now, whole before her, she looked at the hall, and she gave them the only restitution she truly wanted, which was the truth, said plain, so it could never again be unsaid. "I never brought death into this valley," Ida said. "I only ever stood between you and it, in the cold, with my hands, where you couldn't see me doing it. That's all the Cold-Handed ever was. I'd have liked you to know it sooner, but I'll settle for you knowing it now." She did not go back to the ridge, not to stay. They tell it in Stagmere now that the eastern hut still stands, kept trimmed and stocked, a refuge for any traveler the high pass tries to take, with a lamp in its window lit every storm night by the pack's own hand. But the woman who lit it for 4 lonely winters came down off the mountain that spring and never again healed anyone in the dark and unthanked. They put the truth of the fever winter into the telling, the real telling, the one where her 9 sleepless days saved more than anyone could have, and they cut the new law into the boundary stone where every wolf passes it, and the children of the pack, the ones whose mothers her hands had pulled through hard labors up on the ridge, those children grew up knowing the Cold-Handed by a different name, which was simply the Healer, which was all she had ever asked to be called. And Kade, the Alpha King, was a long time worth her, and he knew it, and he did not rush it. A man does not undo 4 years of his pack's cruelty with a single kneeling, and Ada was not a woman who handed her trust to anyone, king or no, for one good day in a hall. But his wolf had known her at the bottom of a grave, and the man learned slowly, through the spring and the summer that followed, to know her too, to bring her, one patient proof and then another, the small concrete tokens that he saw her, the lamp he lit himself the first storm night, the law he stood over while it was cut, the way he learned to put a sick room quiet for her when her own voice was too tired to do it. He courted her the way she had saved him, one patient act at a time, through the cold, refusing to let go. And on the storm nights, when the wind came down off the throat and the lamp burned in the eastern window, the people of Stagmere learned to thank the hands they had once feared, by daylight, to their faces, which is the only thanks that was ever worth anything, and the only one she had never had. They still tell it, on the long nights, when the snow is coming down and the lamp is lit. 6 men went up into the storm, and 6 men came back, lifted out of their graves one at a time by the hands the pack had thrown away. And the 6th, the last, the nearest gone, opened his eyes and stood, and he was the king, and his wolf had known her before the man could speak her name. His wolf knew first, the old ones say, the way they always say it. The wolf knew the truth at the bottom of the snow, and the man and the whole pack above him took 4 years and a near murder to catch up to what the animal understood in an hour. That the one they had decided was the bringer of death was the only thing standing between them and it, the whole time, with her bare, cold hands, asking for nothing. So when your own valley decides what you are, and decides it is the worst thing, and won't be told otherwise. Keep your lamp trimmed. Keep climbing out into the storm for the dying when no one else will hear them fall. You may go a long while unthanked on a cold ridge for it. But the wolf always knows first, and sooner or later the pack is made to see. And on the night they finally watch you lift the sixth man out of his grave with your own 2 hands. Every soul who ever looked through you is going to have to stand there in the snow and look. Keep your hands ready. That's the whole of it. The mountain is always going to need someone awake.